Welcome to Faith Fondue, a new podcast featuring me, author and speaker Haley DeMaria, and teacher and blogger Ann Strickers. Faith Fondue will feature a melting pot of topics ignited by a flame, our faith, and guided by the Holy Spirit. Each week will feature a theme, and the theme for this week's episode is Anniversaries. Welcome, Ann.
Good morning, Haley. Today is the week of January 24th, the third Sunday in Ordinary Time. But I know this is not ordinary. This day is not ordinary for you, Haley. This is an anniversary week for you, which inspired our theme. But let's begin by circling back real quick to our topic from last week, which was justice. And if there's an American virtue, I think it's certainly the strife for justice. What do you think?
Absolutely. Justice and the inauguration. Justice won, as it has for over 200 years of our country. And, we are all grateful and say a prayer of thanksgiving that we had this peaceful transition of power, which in many ways is unique to our country. That doesn't necessarily happen all over the world or has not happened in history. And it's exciting. We have a new president and he's Catholic. That hasn't happened in 60 years, and it's only happened twice in the history of our country. But one thing I noticed this week, and even in the weeks leading up to President Biden's inauguration, is that even though he was sworn in 60 years to the day that our first Catholic president was sworn in, first of all, there was no mention of that it has been 60 years. But there wasn't much mention of President Biden's religion at all. They mentioned he had gone to Mass, but it didn't seem like they made as big a deal of President Biden being Catholic as perhaps they did when President Kennedy was elected and inaugurated. So, and why is that? Why do Catholics seem to not embrace President Biden as they embraced and celebrated President Kennedy? Or is it a fact that a Catholic president isn't as big a deal in 2020, 2021 as it was, back in 1961. It really hasn't been discussed, but it's something I've been thinking about all week.
Haley, when you mentioned that, I had to pause and do kind of an inventory. Is this something that I heard? If so, how often? Who is talking about it? And first of all, you're exactly right. 60 years, that sounds like, that's a significant amount of time, but I actually think that's important for framing what we're looking at today. In those 60 years, Catholics have been so integrated into American life. And I worked at the National Catholic Education Association in Washington, D.C. in the late 90s and 2000s. And the leaders would talk about this quite a bit, that financially Catholics have, which have often been immigrant groups, were in a new place. Because of Catholic schools, they had done well in society. There wasn't this fear of the papacy in the sense of the Pope would be the leader that perhaps a government leader would have to bow to, so to speak. So Joe Biden, from everything I read and continue to hear about, really lives his faith in the sense of he practices his faith. He attends Mass regularly. For example, you mentioned it, Father Kevin O'Brien, he's the president at Santa Clara University. He had Mass for the Bidens at St. Matthew's Cathedral, which is also where JFK's funeral Mass was. I just thought about that. And he's a close family friend. When their son was at Georgetown University, they became friends with him. Kevin O'Brien also did the Mass when he was inaugurated as vice president. So this is a relationship that means something with them. Father Leo Donovan, the former president of Georgetown, gave the with the Bible, the official blessing. I should get that right. I think it's interesting that, Dr. Jill Biden is a convert to Catholicism. It was really important for President Biden in his life. And so his wife, they're joined in their faith and the practice of that. Mike Pence was raised a Catholic and he's now a non-denominational Christian. I don't remember how much talk there was of that. Haley, I don't know if you remember anything like that. But that's kind of an interesting, it's not uncommon. I'm looking at you as a convert. It's not uncommon for people to convert to right? Catholicism. It's not as often, I feel like I usually hear about people losing, like not practicing their Catholic faith. They certainly
Right.
convert to other traditions as well. So maybe we'll frame Mike Pence in that way. But I did think it was really interesting reading about Amanda Gorman, the poet laureate. She's a Catholic. She's from Los Angeles, an Angelino, as we call them, and she's a member of this Josephite parish, which I think is worth noting. The Josephites are priests who work with Black American communities. And so her parish, I haven't been there in Los Angeles, is a Josephite parish. And we certainly see that growth of Catholics in public service and office, even with like 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices being Catholic. So kind of an interesting broad strokes of Catholics in leadership in our country or representation on that day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I smile every time you say the word convert. I feel like I have a special connection with all of my fellow converts out there. I didn't know that about Dr. Jill Biden, that she was a convert, but it certainly makes sense, for when them joining in marriage and raising a family together. Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting. It's neat to see, what I hope is a good moral compass in this leadership, whether it's, rooted in their Catholic faith or Catholic education. It's interesting when we look at the diversity of our country and, wanting to have our country and our leadership really represent that diversity. We talk about diversity in many ways, but a lot of times religious diversity isn't brought up. There's certainly racial diversity. We talk about socioeconomic diversity, diversity in thought, age diversity, gender diversity. But it's neat to see that the religion diversity should be an important part of that conversation as well. And you notice this, circling back to our theme on justice in the NFL this week or recently.
Yeah, diversity is, you're so right about the many criteria, so to speak, or ways that we characterize diversity. So to have, the second president be Catholic is a new face on that diversity. But in the NFL, in the last few weeks, 7 head coaches have lost their jobs. And there's an ongoing emphasis on having more, in particular, Black Americans to be head coaches, to have leadership positions, probably people of color as well. But when so many of the players themselves are Black American, or, then you want to have the leadership represent who's in the group. And it's interesting because there are systems in place. For example, the 49ers, one of their leadership in the front office, was now going to be with the Washington football team. And so the Niners, because he's Black and he's been promoted, the Niners actually get a benefit from that. They get higher draft picks. So they were talking about how there's, again, incentives to facilitate this diversity. But it hit home in San Francisco because the defensive coordinator, his name is Robert Saleh, and he is Arab American, and he will be the head coach of, I believe, I should know this, I think it's, I'm going to mess it up. We could look that up.
I'll look it up. You keep talking.
Yeah, Robert Saleh. Anyways, Robert Saleh is described, my dad told me, as Muslim American in the sports news. And I was like, Dad, no, like, why would they say that? It should be Arab American. But sure enough, when I was listening to sports talk radio, they described him as Muslim American. So to your point about religious diversity, it's interesting when we're trying to get, again, men of color in positions. And I would imagine an Arab man would be considered as diverse in that way as a person of color, but they're describing him through his religious tradition. So,
well, and some of that could just be that, people understand, well, actually they don't understand, which is why they're using the term wrong, being a Muslim versus being an Arab. I just think they aren't probably accurately using that description. And I don't even feel like I'm accurately articulating it right now. But Robert Saleh is going to the New York Jets. They definitely could use some better leadership in New York. My father-in-law is a Jets fan, and it's it's the cross that he bears. I think
Uh,
watching that team every week.
well, he's getting a hardworking coach. That I can say for sure. Nobody, I mean, Robert Saleh, that's a loss for the Niners, but his players recognize what a great opportunity for him. And I do like that. I appreciate that when athletes can see, yeah, it's a loss for them, but they are proud that their, defensive coordinator, somebody who's worked this hard, is finally getting that opportunity.
Sure, they're happy for him. Yeah, no, that's actually, I would imagine, as a coach, the greatest compliment, is to have your players sorry to see you go, but happy that you're being recognized for your talents.
Yeah. And Haley, to your point, I was thinking about, Palestinians when I went to Israel and we went into Palestine, and there's Christians there. And I love having that conversation about self-identity. How do you describe yourself? Are you a Jew? Are you an Arab? Right? Are you an Arabic, Muslim? I'm thinking of like Papua New Guinea or some of the places in the world where you're certainly like Southeast Asian and you identify and you're also Muslim. So it's interesting to let people define for themselves, perhaps.
No, actually, you're totally correct, and it would be really, hopefully somebody out there will hear this and ask, in a position where they could ask, Coach Saleh, how does he self-identify? How would he do that? And you're in education, I'm in education, I work in admissions. How families self-identify is actually the only criteria we use, really. We would never mark someone. We would never check any boxes for a family. They have to self-identify. So I'd be curious to see, how he would self-identify. But just circling back before we move on to our spiritual stew, back to President Biden and our next Catholic president. One thing that I learned watching the inauguration that I thought was really interesting, especially as a fan of the play Hamilton and a former history teacher who found that the whole play, a musical of Hamilton, just fascinating. And George Washington and the whole thing is just, we could probably do a whole show on that. But they mentioned during President Biden's inauguration that Archbishop John Carroll, so certainly that's a name that's familiar to all Catholics. Everybody's heard of, John Carroll. There are many Carroll schools. We have a John Carroll High School in Baltimore. But of course he was a real person, and he wrote the prayer that was read at George Washington's first inauguration. And I just thought, first of all, I had never heard that. I thought that was so cool. Here you have a Protestant president. He's the first president of the United States, a country that is founded on the separation of church and state. And you have a Catholic archbishop who has written and delivering this prayer at that very first inauguration. So there is a foundation at the beginning of our country as it was founded, even though we are, over 200 years later, just inaugurating our second Catholic president, that our faith has been around clearly for a very long time.
And the celebration of, we know people came here for religious freedom so that they were free to worship. So Washington not being, a Catholic, they look at the ecumenical nature of that action. I think that says a lot about, our foundation. So thanks for sharing that with us. And I think John Carroll also founded Georgetown University. I think that's his statue at the heart of campus. I played golf yesterday with a friend who went to Georgetown, and he was telling me during Clinton's second administration, all of his classmates, they went because it was a very public event. The inauguration is usually public. Obviously this year, because of, COVID and whatnot, we saw it was different. There were obviously still people there. And I thought, what a big deal to have, a president, someone elected from your school. Like, obviously as a Notre Dame grad, that would just send me over the top, hopefully.
Right,
but
right.
I'm glad that we were able to partake and enjoy that day and all that it meant. And we can only hope for healing, as President Biden said, as his message, that our country will heal and justice will prevail. So thank you for bringing that back.
You're welcome. So let's steer away from the politics that we promised we wouldn't talk about and move on to our spiritual stew and the gospel readings. And, there was one gospel in particular that really stuck out to me this week. And, our theme this week is anniversaries. And we chose that theme for a reason. As you mentioned, this week marks a pretty significant, very significant anniversary in my life and in the lives of many people within the Notre Dame family. But the gospel this week is Mark 3:35. Jesus says the words, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." And this really spoke to me because, there's this, I have a lot of sayings that I say often. There's some, anyone who gives talks or presentations on a regular basis, you kind of have your catchphrases, for lack of a better word, or you have some themes that you want to make sure that you always touch on. And, I always apologize to people who have heard me give my presentation or speak more than once, because they're going to hear the same jokes, every time. They barely change. And so one thing I always talk about is, how hard it would be to go through something like I did, and I'll talk about that in a second, without my family. And I define family as, the family I was born to, and then my family of origin, and then the family that surrounded me. The people who took care of me, who did the will of God, as this gospel says, and became my brothers and my sisters and my family, and, are just as important to me as my family of origin. So this week marks the 29th anniversary of the Notre Dame swim team bus accident. It was and is certainly an event that defined my life, my coach's life, and defined the lives of all of those on the bus, and really that of our families as well. And it's, anniversaries are really tricky, and, there are anniversaries of many kinds. Certainly I have, the anniversary I share with my husband, that's our wedding anniversary. If someone, has ever passed away, there were my two teammates, Colleen Hipp and Megan Beeler, who passed away. So this anniversary is also the anniversary of their death. The anniversary of someone's passing is a challenging time. This anniversary is, the tragic event that injured me and sent me to 6 back operations and months in the hospital, and completely changed the trajectory of my life. And so talking about anniversaries, it's not so much, I don't necessarily want to talk too much about the accident itself, but what do anniversaries mean? Because everybody's going to celebrate them at some times, or everyone's going to have an anniversary in their life that will be very meaningful to them. Again, whether it's a wedding anniversary, the anniversary of a death, the anniversary of a significant event, they become very important, and they become very tricky because there's so many emotions involved with them. And, one of the things that was very defining for me was actually 28 years ago on the 1-year anniversary of our bus accident. And it was the first time that we had gathered together as a team to recognize and honor this event. There had been the memorial masses. There had been, other times that we had gathered, in part as a team. But coming together at that 1-year anniversary was really interesting. And one of the things that we learned, and in the many years that I've shared this with others, going through a tough time, it's not necessarily the day that's tough, but the week leading up to it, or the time leading up to it. And, that's been true for me for 29 years. January in many ways is not really a fun month for a lot of people. It can be, dark and gloomy and
yes.
Right. Post holidays, and it's
cold.
It's cold. Right. And so, that January time is kind of the, it's the January version of the June gloom. And then that day sometimes is often not hard at all. But in looking at my teammates, what I found as it relates to anniversaries is some people wanted to talk about the accident all the time. Some people never wanted to talk about it. Some people wanted to spend that time with just swimmers. Some people only wanted to be with the team. Some of my teammates didn't want to be with anyone on the team. And what I learned is that everyone responds to things differently. So here's this same event, the Notre Dame swim team bus accident. It happened to all of us. All of us who were on the bus experienced the same accident.
Yes.
But the way we reacted to it was all very different. And, there were 37 of us on the bus, 35 of us who survived the accident, and 35 different ways in which we all healed. And and we had to be okay with that. So if you think of all these young girls, right? I was 18 years old, most of us 18, 19, 20, 21. And you're dealing with girls, right? So we like to judge, and we like to, we want everyone to react to things the way we do because that makes us feel comfortable. So watching my teammates respond to things differently, we had to really learn to care about each other as teammates, as friends, to allow ourselves to heal in the way that was right for us. And that's something that I've seen be true over the last 29 years is people respond to things differently, and people heal differently, and that's okay. And I don't, that just in some ways has just made me probably a more understanding person, a more aware person. I know that, on a day like today, I know who of my friends and family members are going to really want to talk about it. But the other thing that I've noticed is how amazing it is for people to remember. It's very touching to me when I get the text messages on the 24th of January, or, I have friends who will call, or even if they just send me a text that is a heart. The fact that people still remember is really amazing. And, it's a piece of advice that I just gave out recently. I had a late night text about 2 weeks ago from a good friend here in Annapolis, and she said that one of her sons, a good friend of one of her sons, had been in a snowboarding accident that day, and he had just come out of surgery, and he has no feeling or movement from the waist down. They don't know what the situation is, but at this point, he's paralyzed. And she said, "What can we do?" And the first thing I wrote back was, "There's really nothing you can do right now except for pray." Their family is in shock. The parents are just trying to get there. I said, "But the one thing that I know you can do," I said, flip your calendar to, 2022 and write this date on the calendar and make sure you acknowledge it next year when it happens. I said, they've got a long journey. This will be a long, hard year for them. But by this time next year, they won't have the support they're about to feel. And they will be very moved by the fact that you remembered. And she was very relieved to hear that, because so many people do want to help out. And there's times when you can't. But recognizing and honoring that anniversary is really meaningful. So that's a lot of talking, Anne. I appreciate, this being the topic. We mentioned President Kennedy earlier, and, I in no way equate, what happened to us at Notre Dame to anything that happened with President Kennedy. But I do know that, Notre Dame canceled all sporting events that weekend, in 1992, the weekend of our bus accident, for the first time since, the assassination of President Kennedy. And I do know for most of us, it was one of those defining moments in their lives, like it was for many people who were alive in 1963. Who remember where they were when it happened. And that's very defining with anniversaries as well.
Yeah. Haley, there's just so much wisdom in all that you shared, the lived experience, what you've been through, and thank you for sharing all of that. I told Father Tom today I was upset after Mass because I didn't offer during prayers of the faithful, just a prayer of gratitude for just the way that you've used your gift, and all the reflection and, prayerful insight that you've taken from this experience and shared it with the world. Really, I mean, it's such a grace, because that was part of the theme of our homily. So that was a missed opportunity on my part, but I get to offer it here on our podcast. But listening, to you talk, I think about one of the beautiful things in Judaism is that remembrance is prayer. The emphasis on remembering the dead, or remembering events like the Shoah, right? All of the traditions in their faith. And I think that carries over into Christianity. When we remember, that is an act of prayer, because there are plenty of people that would be happy if it's never mentioned. And to your point of like trying to accept that, I think, and I could be wrong, I think it is important to acknowledge and to remember. And we're not called to stay there. We are called to move on. But part of, growing and the grace that you've extended is because, we do look back, we do remember, and we try to see where God is in the midst of all that so that we can move ahead. I'm not sure you can have one without the other, so to speak. So, we need all people. We need those who are, who want to talk about it. We need those who don't. And, we navigate together as a family. And I was thinking as you were speaking, I wasn't a student at Notre Dame, for our listeners, when the bus accident happened. I was a year behind Haley. And I remember being a student at Notre Dame my freshman year, and my roommate was from South Bend, and talking to us about this bus accident and what it meant. And I don't know if there was something in Observer, but we were very aware that it was a significant event. And even at 18 or 19, I don't know that you can fully grasp the, losing a young person, let alone two, and then how it affected so many people's lives. You only have a small sense of that. But coming into this community and hearing about that, and that is why we call it the Notre Dame family, because it wasn't something that wasn't acknowledged. And I think in our own families, like I learned about my grandparents, my mom's grandparents, my dad's grandparents, even though I never knew them, or my mom's favorite aunts. We still talk about Aunt Cecilia. I never met her. I cannot wait, someday in eternal life to, be with her, so to speak. But part of a family is passing down those stories and what are the takeaways from them. So it's an interesting perspective to share with you as someone who, joined that family and was learning about this event and how people were affected. So I'm glad we were able to pray, and there must have been a mass, or, like I said, maybe an article in the Observer or whatnot.
Well, and I love that you make that analogy between the Notre Dame family and the real family, because you're right. We all have kind of family members of lore that we talk about and maybe never met. And that, it's very true even today, actually, as we're taping this podcast, the current men's and women's swim team on campus are down at the grotto praying for the Megan and Colleen and the swim team of 1992. They weren't even born in 1992. This is history to them. But they still recognize and honor and don't sweep it under the rug. It is something to honor and recognize. And I do think that that's something we can do, incorporate into our lives. And maybe it's our takeaway this week. Moving into the melting pot is who can we reach out to and remember and recognize, in a meaningful way. I love that. Yeah, I know that's, it's one thing that I try to do all the time. I thought I was just doing it for, a year and a half. My goals were always to walk again and swim again for Megan and Colleen. I wanted to do that. And then I did, certainly I walked and then swam again for Notre Dame and wanted to do that for them, and then realized that wasn't enough. That was only 2 years. And so it is a very real way that I try to live my life, is to make sure that I honor and remember them, and make sure other people remember them. That brings me great joy to know that they live on within so many other people.
And Haley, I think another takeaway might be to really pray for the family, or, if it's a family that you feel a part of, like at St. Francis, the school I'm at, we use that word all the time, and a lot of communities do. And so if that's something you really believe in, like, pray for the family, pray for the Notre Dame family. I have mentioned this. I'm reading Pilgrimage by Mark Shriver about Pope Francis. And there's this really powerful line in the book that says, Bergoglio received his deep, deep faith from his family. That is where he learned his faith. And I thought, wow, like, if that's true, that is by far the most important. I know some parents, like, because I work with teenagers, they want their child to choose for themselves. And, that's part of their story. But if we can give a young person faith, like within our family, what an incredible gift. And when you were talking about family, I was thinking about my own family. My mom's parents are both from Ireland, and I always felt like that was such a gift to be Irish, literally by heritage. And we've had the ability to visit our family many times. And my grandmother was from the north, Donegal, a very rural area. And I remember being in the store at 12 noon, and they must have prayed the Angelus, because Ireland was traditionally a very Catholic religious country. And they would say the names of people who had died on that day, be it 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago. And, in these small towns, people know each other, but it's part of their practice to honor the dead, and that they are part of our lives, even though they're not living. So what an interesting perspective to pray for the dead, but to remember the dead as we are talking about that, and to know that we'll see them again. And so, another perspective or takeaway this past week, we lost Larry King. We lost Hank Aaron, one of the greatest baseball players of all time. I'll link his 715th home run, which is when he surpassed Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth had 714 home runs, and Hank Aaron had 715. And there were a lot of people that did not want him to beat that record because he's a Black American. Right. But he lived 86 years, and I thought, this is a man, he had a great run. So we are grateful that he had a long life and a good life. And, whether it's 19 years or 86 years, to lose somebody is always a loss. I don't want to minimize that. But thinking about this past week, people have been really struck because there have been a number of baseball stars in recent days that have left us.
Well, and it's, I will say that is one of the upsides of social media. For better or worse, that's how I learned of both of these passings this week, both Hank Aaron and Larry King. And both times I've turned to my husband and said, did you know Larry King died? Or did you know Hank Aaron died? And he always says yes. And I keep thinking, why didn't you tell me?
But I know. Once we stop reacting to that, it's like, that's news. You can't top that. Come on.
Right. Yeah. But they're such wonderful tributes. Both of them led extraordinary lives in their own way. But to have that reflection and to be able to share, just to share their lives in different ways, it can get out there so quickly. You don't have to wait like we used to for the newspaper article the next day or a great piece on the 6:00 news. So as much as social media is can be snarky sometimes, it's still a great way to be able to honor and reflect people too. And I love that tradition of the reading of the names. We do that in the Monogram Club at Notre Dame also. At our annual mass, everyone who's passed, who's in the club that year, has their name read. And I think all of us who sit in mass at that time think, wow, someday my name will be read. And just what a neat thing that is to be remembered, as the people go on before us. But
it's an interesting dance, Haley, though, because my parish, St. Dominic's, they have one of the intentions is we pray for the one among us who will go next. So in your facial reaction, it's like, is that macabre? Is that, is that truly morbid? Or is that, just right. That's life. That's true. But it feels so, it's
interesting.
Here. Yes. So I do say we pray to the Lord, right? Because it could be me, but hopefully not.
Well, I also saw, I don't know if it was a meme or it sounds like I spent a lot of time on social media. I really don't. But someone said, if you take the bouquet off the casket and toss it, does the person who catches it
No, they did not. Well, as someone who's caught a bouquet more times than most women, I don't know.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. I'll never forget one time I went to it was a friend from Notre Dame's sister, and she was an ace with us, Bridget Moorhead. And I caught the bouquet and I went back to campus and I decided to take the bouquet to the grotto. So because Bernadette, there's Bernadette is praying to Our Lady and she holds flowers. So I took the bouquet to honor Bridget and her husband. And this Father Gary Chamberlain sees me and I tell him what's happening. And he's like, wow, Anne, you are really praying that this works out. And I said, not for me, Gary, for Bridget. But I thought that was pretty funny. That's totally his humor. So.
Well, it has certainly been an extraordinary week for the third Sunday in ordinary time. There was certainly nothing ordinary about this week, from a peaceful transition of power, a new Catholic president, certainly losing two American icons in their own way. And then certainly just in my own life, in the life of the Notre Dame family, recognizing and honoring and remembering my teammates, Megan Beeler and Colleen Hipp, and the Notre Dame swim team of 1991-92, both the men's and the women's teams. Just really an extraordinary and meaningful time all around. And, this week I know is one of your favorite Sundays. It's not quite the Sunday Masters or Masters Sunday. I'm not a golf person, so I probably didn't saying that right, but
good.
We're still in football season. As my son said, before the game started this weekend, there are only 3 football games between now and August. And I thought that is a depressing thought.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. I know when you put it that way. But I know this is one of your favorite weeks of the year. And as always, even though it is ordinary time, there are certainly extraordinary events going on. And I think that's God's gift. And that's our challenge, is to find the extraordinary in the ordinary. Because the miracles are there every day. On ordinary days, even, we just have to choose to see them. And so we are sorry we are not going to see Aaron Rodgers in the Super Bowl, but I know we both look forward to his stint on Jeopardy.
That's the hope, right? So yeah, I'm disappointed. I'm not gonna lie. I just watched that first game. So yeah, AFC, NFC Championship. Just so much good football. I just love playoff football. I love playoff baseball as well. I'm sure our listeners love playoff basketball, and that's fine, but really football and baseball for me. But yeah, Aaron Rodgers was a guest on Jeopardy before Alex Trebek died, and he won on Celebrity Jeopardy. And apparently he watches Jeopardy every night at 6 p.m. And he believes that Trebek was one of our nation's great school teachers. Another someone we lost in the past year when he died of pancreatic cancer. So they are, I think at this point, committed to Ken Jennings. I'm not sure as the host, but it is one of Aaron Rodgers' goals to host Jeopardy, and he will certainly have the time now. So I'm confident you don't get to that level and not be devastated to get that far and not take it to the next step. But if we can offer silver lining, maybe it's that he will get to be part of one of America's favorite game shows. So TBD.
Again, making something hopefully extraordinary out of, well, there's nothing ordinary about Jeopardy or Aaron Rodgers.
For that point, yeah.
But thank you, Anne. It's always extraordinary talking to you in this, again, third Sunday in ordinary time. As we move throughout this week, I look forward to our conversation next week. I look forward to remembering, reaching out this week. I hope our listeners will do the same. And we look forward to hearing from all of you next week.
Thank you, Haley. 29 years of health and just, all that you've been able to share and offer the world from an event that was a huge loss, but obviously been focusing on acknowledging the loss, and living with the loss, but also looking at the grace. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a great week.
Until.